Can you guys hear me? Okay. I'm going to call this meeting to order at 5 p.m. on Monday, August 21st. I'm going to run through the roll call really quick. Hope everybody's doing okay and having a nice summer. Let's see, Dennis Baker. All right, thanks, Dennis. Kurt, I see you. Matthew Brady? No? James Carlson? All right, James, how you doing? Good. Jeff? Oh, Jeff's not here. Okay. Annie? No? Susan DeSantis?
Here.
All right. I'm here, okay. David Gruder? Here. All right. Lynn Hackman? Laird Hayes? Charles? Sir? All right. Ruth has an excused absence. Scott, are you here?
Here.
All right. How you doing?
Good.
Katie has an excused absence. Katie has an excused absence. Okay, Anthony?
Maniscalchi?
Yes.
Here.
Tony. All right.
I was looking around for
All
Anthony.
right. Okay, Thomas? No? Jim, you're here. Okay. Maxwell? No. Robert Rader? Harrison? No. Nancy's here. Amber Snyder? All right. Debbie Stevens? All right. Hey, Debbie. Graham?
Here.
All right. Hey, Graham. Christy?
Here.
All right. Paul Watkins? Lori Williams? No. Okay, I think we have quorum, right? We should have 15. So we need one more? Okay.
Paul Watkins has a library board meeting. He'll be here at 6 o'clock.
15. 16. How many are on there? 30. 29. Yeah.
We're good. We're good. We have quorum. All right. All right. So first thing is I'm going to call for a public comments on any non-agenda items. Anybody from the public would like to say anything? You have 3 minutes. Nobody from the public? Yes, please. And if I could, somebody could hand one of the microphones down, please. Thank you.
Yeah, real quick, I think it's, I remember I got, at the conclusion of last meeting, the gentleman doing the audio visual was indicating to me we need to be very clear to have everyone speak into the microphone, otherwise your voices won't be heard. So as annoying as it is to pass the mic down, we definitely need to wait for that, in other words, to have a clear record.
Good evening. I'm not sure that I'm bringing this up at the right time. I'd be happy to bring it up later. I have some questions about the, Deborah Allen Moore.
Thank you.
I have some questions about the exhibits that were attached to the staff report. The pictures or renderings of buildings. Would it be appropriate to ask those questions now or wait till you get there?
Go ahead, please proceed.
Okay. Well, looking at the ones in Newport Beach, the airport area, I believe they have not been built. So these are just renderings. And I'm curious as to how large the units are. These are the ones that are 98 dwelling units an acre. It's an illustration of that. I'd appreciate to know how large the units are. And how many people do you anticipate per unit? Because I understand that perhaps some of them are very small, and I think it's laudable to think that they will all live as single individuals. I think that's unrealistic, and I know the city, at least as my understanding, cannot limit the number of people living in a dwelling unit. It's been suggested maybe the developer can. I'm not sure that's going to pass muster when it's the developer at the request of the city. Courts are not real fond of that kind of chain of who can do what with regard to civil rights. But anyway, then my question would be how, if we think we can restrict the number of people living in those units, how we would anticipate doing that. And finally, if we don't do that, and these do turn out to be families, even if it's a small family, where are kids going to play? Where are people going to go to the grocery store? These are enormously dense units, and I fear that what it creates is a slum. So that's my
Well, thanks for
comments.
that. Thanks for that, Deborah. And I was made aware that we have an agenda item on this as well, so we can talk about that during that too. But I wanted to give you a chance to say it too. So, and I'm sure some other folks will have some comments to that. Please, Dennis.
Yeah, you mentioned us having a quorum just a moment ago. Is there a point where we call this committee, or, otherwise, some people haven't been showing up? Is there a point where the membership is reduced to accommodate that? Because that would affect the quorum, I think, because quorum's a percentage, right? A number of.
Well, we just had more people.
I don't
walk
mean
in,
to.
right?
I don't mean today. I mean in general. Is there a point where people who are not attending the meetings or not participating are called from the committee? What's the process, or is there one?
We have recommended that members who do not attend miss 3 meetings with unexcused absences, be removed from the committee, and that will go to the council shortly,
Tomorrow evening, yes.
tomorrow evening, okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, good question. Thanks, Dennis, and thanks, Deborah, again for the comments. We'll come back to some of those during the land use element, if that's okay. Any other comments from the public? No? We had some people walk in. Just wanted to make sure that Ben got those folks. So if you want to, all right, we got Matthew Brady. Anybody else? Okay, Jeff, thank you. Annie, okay, thank you. All right, anybody else? No, okay. All right. So moving on to current business. Again, thanks, Deborah, for your comments. I'd like to get a motion to approve the meeting minutes from July 19th. All right, thanks, Dennis. Get a second on that?
Second.
Okay, is that Susan? Thank you. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? I'll abstain since I was absent. Okay, all right, moving on to the land use element. I noticed that Nancy brought in some paperwork for us. I think she dropped it off for each of us. This is where we're going to be talking about the land use element, banning ranch, and some of the other issues. I'd like to start off with you, Nancy, if that's okay. You want to explain the some of the paperwork there? Sure. Thanks.
Okay. So what I dropped off at, I think, almost everybody's desk, except for a couple people who walked in late, is a copy of the actual approved, adopted housing element that was submitted and approved by HCD. And if you look at the total potential capacity, development capacity, you'll see that on the far right-hand column in the blue is 10,403 units. That's based on about a 35% affordable component. So if we have projects that are at 5% or 10% or 15%, that number goes up. So the second page is a study that I did, and I adjusted these numbers today to take out Banning Ranch because we're not talking about that anymore, and I used the new numbers from this housing element to show what happens. So the column that's the wide column that's farthest to the left, table B1, that corresponds to the housing element. Those are the actual numbers from the housing element. The orange column next to it is what happens if we have 5% affordable and 95% market. What we end up with is 49,000 units. That's with the density bonus that's allowed by law, and for a 5% affordable, a developer can use a 20% density bonus, so that number jumps dramatically. If we have projects that are a 15% affordable, 85% above market or market, They get a 50% bonus, 50% density bonus. So with the density bonus, which isn't considered at all in the housing element, it's not even addressed, we end up with 35,000 units. You can see that these numbers are just dramatically higher than anything we're talking about. Chances are we're not going to get to this, but the point I'm trying to make is that we are talking about increasing units per acre and the density of things without even considering how we're going to get the affordable units. So if we have a high percentage of affordable units, it might make sense to do some things, but we're not getting that. We're not seeing that. The city council isn't wanting to have any kind of inclusionary policy. So we are looking at a lot of new units in here to conform to our housing element.
Thanks.
How much is in the housing element now? 30%, you're saying?
It's about, we have
10,000.
actually, you do that, it's about 35 to 38% affordable.
35% translates to 10,000 units?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
So
if you lower that,
yeah.
you move the numbers the opposite
So you're
direction.
jumping from 35 to 20 to 15 to 5.
Right.
Okay, got it.
So if you want just the raw numbers without the density bonus, they're on here too. For 5%, the raw numbers without the density bonus are 12,000 units. 15% without the density bonus is 15.5. I don't know why any developer would build a project without the density bonus, but it's possible. I mean, it could happen.
Thanks for that, Nancy.
So can I just a few clarifications on the density bonus you were saying is just by law? Is that
The density bonus is law. It's in the California government code. You can look it up. It's here. It's a long chart,
Believe
and
you.
it's like 35, 45 pages of stuff. But it's in here, and it's a sliding scale based on the number of units that you provide that are affordable. And then, in addition to that, there are other things in here, like they get, what do they call them? There are extra concessions and incentives based on the number of, so they get less parking, or they get higher building height, or all kinds of things. So this law went into effect a couple of years ago, and it's affecting everything now, starting now.
so the inputs are dwelling units per acre as a start, coupled with amount of affordable, and that determines your density bonus allowable.
Actually, it doesn't consider dwelling units per acre at all. It just considers the
Affordable.
percentage of affordable in a project.
So you scale up the affordable, you get more density.
Correct. Yeah. And it starts at 5%, and you get 50% is the maximum bonus density, and that's, if you put 15% affordable units in a project, you get a 50% density bonus, which is big, huge. And the other thing I'll point out is the density bonus units do not have to include any affordable units. So if you have 100 units and you have a 5% density bonus, or 15% density bonus, 15% affordable, 15% affordable, you would get 150 units, but you would only have to have 15% of those 150 be affordable.
Actually, it's
The original
15% of the 100 units.
Of the 100, yes.
Not the 190.
Of the 100. Did I say 150?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
It's
And
okay.
last
You're right.
Last
that's even
question
worse.
was sorry was about the city. The city was not opening up the amount of affordable. You said I was
No.
trying to
The
clarification.
city,
on
have been a couple of times when the discussion has come up in front of the city council to have some sort of inclusionary across the board, and that's been rejected, or they're not inclined to go that way. In the last city council meeting, they reduced the percentage of affordable, the inclusionary at the airport area, from 30%, which is one of the few areas that we do have
The only.
room to build some dense units. They reduced it down to 15. So we're going the other direction right now.
So the city is the box that they've started, or at least the matrix they're starting with, is 15% for the airport area. The rest of Newport they haven't really said.
There's no
So it could be
inclusionary
100% market.
Yeah,
Okay. Got
yeah.
it.
There's no requirement for any. I think there have been projects that there have been requirements, but they usually do, the developers usually do the affordable in order to get the density bonuses. They're not doing it because the city has a requirement. They're doing it because they get extra units that don't have to be affordable, which makes it possible to, in some cases, to pencil something out. I mean, this is difficult. Newport Beach has expensive land costs, construction costs are right now are going through the roof. So it's not easy, but I'm just pointing out that we're setting ourselves up for something that we're offering incentives that we might not want to offer because we're already in trouble. So that's mine.
Thanks, Nancy.
Just a quick question. What's before us right now? I think with that as a background, which I think is good, but why don't somebody explain what's before us? I think there was a land use element subcommittee, and there was, I think, 3 voting members there. So why don't you let us know what's actually on the table?
Yeah, so on page 17, you've got a report from the land use committee, the subcommittee that met, and we've got some changes in there which are highlighted both in the actual document, but if you look sort of at the far right, gives a recommendation as to those different elements in there. And then if anything was changed, it's highlighted in red. So that starts on page 17 in your packet. So what we need to do today is to review those recommendations if you haven't already, and have a vote on that, and then also consider removing Banning Ranch from the development piece. So those are the 2 things we need to do for this item. Any other comments? Susan, please.
Is it on? Yeah, okay. I wanted to ask, actually make a request that when there is a subcommittee meeting, that the individuals who participated in that subcommittee be identified. As I understand it, the noticing for the meeting came late, and that there were very few people at the meeting itself. And so I think there is standard operating procedure. It's important to know who is actually participating in the meeting.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Susan, for that. Ben, do we know?
Actually, that's a great comment. Thank you, Susan. Just so everyone has it in front of them, it's actually called out in Mr. Mosier's comments as well. We had Matthew Brady, Tony Maniscalchi, Robert Rader, Debbie Stevens, although she had to leave us early. Mr. Jim Mosier showed up for part of the meeting, as I recall, and also Chair Gardner from the steering committee was in attendance. Oh, also Christy Walker. Thank you. So we had 4 or 5 members for the duration, with a couple who had to leave at certain points in time. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Susan. Charles, please.
Hi. Go ahead, Debbie.
Okay, so you want me to start? So I just want to make sure everybody knew what was on the table. So it looks like that you're going up to a bonus or a density of 75 dwelling units, 75 to 85 dwelling units per acre. So, except for the West Cliff area, as I recall. So that stays at 50. So it's essentially everything in the city except for West Cliff. And I think people should look at the site analysis to understand what, and with the density bonus, you get that this is essentially 100 dwelling units an acre. So that's every site, minus West Cliff. That's, essentially the YMCA, the stuff around the Back Bay, it's the YMCA. It's the stuff that's part of the executive golf course, the stuff that's close to the airport. It's all of the airport. It's everything along Mariners Mile. It's the Newport Tennis Club, which is like 7.5 acres. So that comes out to, do the math, 7 times 100, you get the idea of the density that would be allowable. It's a lot of parcels along Pacific Coast Highway in the Newport Center area. It's some parcels behind Corona Del Mar and some of the apartments that are there. and then Coyote Canyon as well, actually, that would go even higher. There may be places in the city where I would support 100 dwelling units an acre, but it's not everything. So I have a real problem with this kind of density at every site. I think at best it needs a little bit of information like, here's the data, here's what it cost, here's what it cost to construct, here's what the land is. The developers need a certain profit. Okay, fine, that's all very understandable, but there's absolutely nothing in front of us, no developers coming forward to say this is what we need and why. It's just, this is what we think is a good idea, so I don't support it.
Thanks, Debbie. Any comments? Charles,
Hi there,
please.
sure, thank you. So just for clarification, if you will, 30 dwelling units an acre really is 45 for apartments, and that yields 4 affordables. That's all the law requires. Even in Newport Beach, where we have an inclusionary at the airport, the state law is the same, it's 4. At 50 dwelling units an acre, it's really 75, and 7 affordable units. At 75 units an acre, it's really 114, and 11 affordable units total. 85, it's 128 with 12 affordable units. At Coyote Canyon, we're dealing with one property owner. One property owner, if that person comes to us with a project that requires X density, we can consider a general plan amendment. Why give that away at this point? It's worth recalling that the people of Newport Beach, the residents who pay nearly 50% of the city's budget in property tax, are not clamoring for more market rate housing. They would like none. They think there's enough people here and traffic is bad enough. So we're doing this under duress to support HCD's demand. We did that with the housing element. There's some smoke and mirrors there, great. But I don't see any reason we should go out of our way to make it more attractive than the law requires us to. There's nothing compelling us to do this. There's nobody standing here saying, I've got this project. The airport area has several owners, and maybe somebody comes with a project that makes sense, but to offer it, as Debbie Stevens says, as a blanket in advance before there's a project before the council which could easily approve a general plan amendment, why give it up now? Larry Tucker had a committee that picked all these sites. They assigned the density. We had lots of input then. We struggled with the amount of density at the time and compromised to what is in the housing element. So why now would we even consider increasing it without a project before us? So there's no possible way I can support this. The Banning Ranch removal, I of course support 100%, but I would leave it just the way it is. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Any other comments? David, please.
Thank you for mentioning that. One of my questions is who's driving the law? You said it's HCD. And are there any penalties that we, the city, is going to receive for not doing this?
Right, okay.
Can HCD basically reject the plan? They don't have to approve this element. They've already approved housing.
Well, just to clarify, HCD has certified our housing element. There were certain assumptions made in that housing element analysis. I don't think the genesis of the densities that are in the housing element, which are 50 and 60 dwelling units per acre, really wasn't established by the housing element, by Larry Tucker's committee. But at the end of the day, when we established those densities, they were consistent with, say, the airport area today allows up to 50 dwelling units per acre currently. And so that was just an assumption just to maintain that existing density. The recommendation to increase the density was really borne out, in discussing development of these projects and under these current economic conditions with several stakeholders in town, large property owners. They're suggesting that they're not even going to touch these projects, meaning the development that we might anticipate in the airport area might not occur on certain properties because the density isn't high enough. And so the thought we were having was, while 50 dwelling units per acre might be fine, and yes, you can also consider a maximum of 50% density bonus, that is entirely possible. It is within current state law, and it's been on the books for many, many years. But the notion is that if you did increase the density, we could have fewer projects that would actually be built consistent to this underneath the cap, and no one is suggesting that we change the caps or increase the caps, because again, those are in the housing element, and the city council is not interested in changing the housing element at this point in time. And so the thought would be is, well, especially in the airport area where, density may be more appropriate, higher density, we've got projects that were built out there that are 60, and in one case, we've entitled a project through a transfer of development and density bonus that's actually approaching closer to 90 dwelling units per acre, or 93 actually. I guess the thought is that we would be approving fewer projects up in that area as a result. Now, I understand your trepidation on certain other areas in town. That would make sense, and I appreciate those comments here. But that's sort of the reason why that was discussed at the last land use subcommittee meeting, and there was a consensus of those who were there at the meeting. And again, it was a small number of people, recognize that, to include that as a recommendation. And so my thought here today is, really we have three things on our plate to discuss. First is the overall recommendation of the policy matrix here. Second is whether to include Banning Ranch or take Banning Ranch out. And third, embodied in that also is, maybe not Banning Ranch per se, is the density question, which we're kind of focusing on now. So hopefully that will kind of help Debbie with what's before us today here. What are we asking the committee to look at? And it's really those three questions that are within this entire policy matrix.
Nancy,
I have
please.
a
Then
question.
Graham.
Oh,
Nancy, then Graham, yeah.
I have a question about that. So what would be the downside of not approving across the board density bonus and allowing projects to be reviewed individually? We need to build, or we need to plan for, we're never going to build all these, but we need to plan for 2,376 affordable units. When we're doing that 4 or 11 or 15 per project, it's going to take us a long time to get there. So what we would need are projects that have a very high percentage of affordable units. Why would we not structure this so that it would be on the developer to come to us and say, hey, I can do 100 units per acre and I can give you 100 affordable units? It seems to me that's a better method to incentivize getting those affordable units, because we are expected to provide that by the state. So,
Thanks, Nancy. Graham, please.
Thank you. I'm actually very, very strongly in support of this. I actually don't think it goes far enough. By the way, great work on the matrix. We're talking about one number in here, which is 75 versus 50, but all of the other work that went into it was, we're talking about revising a land use matrix for the city of Newport Beach. So like that, from a baseline, incredible work. I think there's a big misconception about affordability, right? The state and more broadly the country is bought into the idea that we need to mandate affordable housing, which has been moderately successful. It has created some more affordable housing, but I think that I know, and it's been proven via various studies, that creating more housing is actually the most appropriate way to create a more affordable housing, is just to create more housing, period. The state is probably 15 years behind the amount of housing that it needs more broadly, and this is across the state. Newport Beach is no exception. And so if we have a mandate and we actually believe, and I think that the problem here is actually the belief that we don't want more people here. I think deep down there's a belief that we don't want any more people in Newport Beach, and that's fine. I think that it can be, it's wrong, morally wrong, in fact. But that's what sits behind the desire to have less housing in the city of Newport Beach. I believe in this city, the best way to create more housing and to create more affordable housing is to build that housing for people. I have 5 children. Their ages 10 through 3. There's zero chance that they will be able to live here during college, after college, etc. The people who work here, who clean these parks, who cut the grass out here, cannot live in this city. They're not able to, because it's too expensive. There's not enough housing here. So unfortunately, a perspective that says we don't need any more housing is just wrong. The state is mandated we have more housing. I think that, or I know that 75 dwelling units per acre, the conception that it creates more traffic is wrong. More highly dense housing actually creates less traffic per capita than more traffic per capita. You'll see more people walking. You're already starting to see it in Newport Center and in in the airport area where people are walking to work because that's where the jobs are. The office building's right next to work. Why wouldn't you walk? And so I think the other piece here too is by limiting the number of housing units being developed in the city is frankly enriching the Irvine company. That's really what's going on here. It's actually creating people who already have monopolies here or who already have theirs. I own my house. I'm actually one of the people of the haves, right? Anyone who wants to live here cannot live here. There's very, very few affordable places for them to live. So I think by freeing and liberating the housing opportunities in the city, that will actually do what we're set out to do here, which is to create a place that people who want to live here can live here. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Anybody else? Any comments? Jim, please.
Yeah, expanding on what Charles and Nancy said, Charles was mentioning Coyote Canyon, saying it had a single property owner, the county, and apparently a single developer, Tate & Associates, whose name is misspelled in the minutes that we just approved. My reading of the housing element, which I brought up at the subcommittee meeting, is that Coyote Canyon is not just Coyote Canyon, but it's Coyote Canyon, potential for development at the Sage Hill High School site, and potential for development at another completely disconnected site off in Newport Coast, east of Newport Coast Road. And so I'm not sure I understand the policy to start with, but in implementing this in the zoning, would the same, whatever density we chose for Coyote Canyon, would that then automatically apply to those other areas for which we might have a different vision? That's question one. And question two is, I see the illustrations, like Ms. Allen pointed out, of the high-density housing. When we contemplate very high densities, I am wondering how that interacts with our height limitations that we have and encourage elsewhere in the general plan and the consistency with those. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Scott, please go ahead. Do you?
I just wonder, so I think the reason it needs to be codified is we need to, if you're going to get people to develop, you've got to help manage the risk. And so it can't just be a subjective review process every time. It's just too onerous to do that. But there could be a way of capping it. There could be a way of, as a project gets to a certain size, like we've had the green light and things like that, there could be a way, where that would throw it into a more subjective process. But a more codified process, and especially if there are going to be maybe slightly smaller projects that are a little bit more palatable, might be an approach as well.
Thank you, Scott. Jim, please. Did you have some comments?
I was going to ask Jim to restate his question because I didn't really quite understand the full scope. I do recognize that with density bonus, and I think everyone should recognize this, that with density bonus, as Nancy indicated, they are allowed development standard waivers, an unlimited number of them, which means if you're building a density bonus project, the assumption is there's going to be 5, 10, or 15, 20, or even 50% more units. And the development standard waivers are there to provide relief to the local development standards to allow that density that building to fit, if you will. So building heights, setbacks, open space standards are definitely all on the table for relief. A developer, they're entitled to them. And that's the way the law works right now. And there's nothing that we can do about it. So let that sink in. I want everyone to understand that we can't not process density bonus projects. The law provides for this process. We must provide that process consistent with law. And yes, those development standards can be relaxed, if you will, and we've done it several times. We have a 55-foot high building height standard for the airport area in the residential overlay of Newport Place. And we've entitled an 85-foot high building. That's just how that process worked. It was a density bonus. It was through that process that project went forward. So I think when you look at our standards, our objective development standards, if it is a market rate project or a non-residential project, our standards are very solid. Right? We have every right to enforce those. Designers have to design to those or seek relief from those through standard processes like a variance. But with affordable housing and density bonus, just those projects alone, those are where our development standards, are guidelines at best. And if they're only a market rate project and no affordability and no density bonus, then they would be solid. So I think it's important to recognize that.
Thanks, Jim.
When you're granting those, are you granting those with or without a variance, or are they just discretionary on the department?
It's not discretionary.
Okay, fine.
And it's not a variance.
Okay.
Because under the law, they're entitled to them, and so they're not discretionary.
Mm-hmm.
So, all they need to do is basically demonstrate that the project can't fit within those development standards. And there's been recent court activity, not at the appellate level that could be cited, but or the Supreme Court, but the cities have been not allowed to redesign projects to fit their standards. I believe it was the city of LA or the city of San Diego wanted to redesign a project in a different way to then make the project adhere to the open space. They basically told the developer, make the units smaller, make the whole development smaller, and then you'll comply. And it was a test case, and the courts basically threw out the city's denial and approved the project, straight up.
So is the state, in taking SB 35 as an example, even though that has a sunset in 2026, I understand that they are looking to kick that out even further, and I think I understand, eliminate all the discretionary approvals that a local city might have.
I think that would be a goal that I see the legislature attempting to do. SB 35 does allow for expedited review of projects when the city is not compliant with housing element law, and right now we're compliant. So if we can implement the housing element, we'll maintain that compliance, and SB 35 wouldn't be applicable to us. So if we fail to implement these overlays in the time frame within which we promised, 36 months, then the state could decertify the housing element, then we would be subject to SB 35. But SB 9 is another state mandate that preempts local zoning control. What is it, AB 2021 or 2011? 2011, which became effective July 1st, even takes it one step further. In fact, that today, office projects, could theoretically be converted to residential, despite what any of our general plan and zoning would say, if they meet certain criteria of that particular law. We do have some developers who are inquiring about that process. And so, I think when you see the whole body of housing element law and just housing policy by the state, they're definitely taking away local control. And just kind of to reiterate, the housing element and their mandates that we have for the RENA, we just have to plan for the housing. And so we have a housing plan. We've got these programs, again, that would be implemented with these policies that are in your packet. And at the end of the day, we're not held accountable for the production side. That's not our job. We don't build housing. We provide the opportunity for the housing to be built, and the market would take place, and projects will come, and then we'll see what our unit production looks like over time. Now, I think if we were the city that didn't have any housing production or had zero affordable housing production over the next 8 years, that's definitely a city that we don't want to be that city. We definitely don't want to be that city, because I would envision that the state would look at us and say, well, okay, your plan, while we did certify it, it's worthless because nobody built anything. Or the density standards or whatever policy that's within our documents might have been viewed as an impediment. I mean, if we have an inclusionary housing percentage where we mandated, say, 30% of all new projects to be 30% affordable, I think what we would find is very few projects, if any, would be built over the next 8 years, and the state would come back and look and say, well, that might be an impediment to housing production. And they'd be right. Our own study suggests that that would be an impediment, and that's why we recently, the council reduced the inclusionary requirement in Newport Place up in the airport area from 30% down to 15%. A little bit of background.
And you still have all the controls. You still have height. You still have the inclusionary stuff like sidewalk, curb, gutter, setbacks. You have all those to control, the ultimate density of a project.
At the end of the day, yes. The cost of materials, the type of construction, what the market would bear. There's a whole myriad of factors that play into why a developer designs a project the way that it is. Objective development standards are things that we can apply to a project. Subjective ones, we won't be able to. So that's one of the things that we're also doing, is looking at our standards in our zoning codes and in other codes to make sure we're going to modify them to be objective so they can apply.
Thanks, Jim. Susan, please.
So I did have an opportunity to serve on the housing housing element update committee, and I do believe that that committee and the residents do support workforce housing and being able to provide housing here in the community for critical workers, in particular essential workers. So I would just suggest that there is support, but when the general plan update committee started and the land use committee started to meet, I think what the direction was that we were not going to change the housing element, that was a given, that the land use committee, the land use plan, more or less implementing the housing element was a given. So it seems counterintuitive to see this being suggested now. And I don't personally see the need for it. I think that the housing element that the city did certify was approved by HCD, and that the number of units in each of the areas based on the densities that were within the plan itself is what was in the element that was approved, and that's what I can support. I think the other increases are challenging for different areas within the city. And I for one, living in Newport Coast, think that number of units at those densities within Coyote Canyon are definitely a problem and would not be supported by the community.
Thanks, Susan. Any other comment? Robert, please, and I'm going to come back to Ben after that.
Yeah, so I was one of the members at the Land Use Committee, and we've been dealing with this, and really wanted to jump in after our last GPAC meeting because I was thrown off by the increase from 50 units to 75. And I thought, well, that's just another number to throw out there to increase and make life better for developers. But then I made some calls. I'm not a developer myself. I'm in commercial real estate. And I talked to a good number of them, and they just, right off the bat, 50 just isn't going to cut it. It's minimum 75, which gets a really nice project. They do a wrap around a parking lot, and 90 to 100 is better, and they'll include affordable housing in that. So in order to get to the prices that it would take to sell an acre of real estate in Newport Beach, it wouldn't even start to make sense unless we were at 75. And they would then use density bonus and things like that and other opportunities and subjective politics or what they can do to try to push that number over 100. And so to me, I thought, well, you could go through this subjective process, and there's a developer now that we learned about in Newport that was able to own one property and take the units from that one, buy another one, start to apply them to that one, then work more angles and get his units up to 90 units an acre or so. I think that's the right number on Bristol. And So that game, that's only one developer that can play that game, and that limits our ability to see competition amongst different developers in our area. So if we were just to level the playing field in transparency and say, hey, look, we know that anything less than 75 is going to be a tall order. You can't do it, and guys are not going to be able to raise the money and get the development, get the construction loans they need in order to develop. That if we at least start them out at 75, we'll start to see more developers come in. It will be a competitive process, I think, and we'll see some more creative opportunities to make our city nicer. I also think that we shouldn't be scared of density. 50 units per acre would mean that we have to create more projects throughout a whole block. If we go 79 to 100, that means we have fewer projects, and we can build more offices, more medical offices, more retail around that, and create more of an urban environment that's more mixed use rather than 50 unit pods everywhere we go in an area. So I do think that there's some benefits to it, and I think it looks really good. I don't know what it is over there in the Fashion Island, what the Irvine company does, but I'm sure all of their projects are above 75 units an acre. So I think that it's a different number, it's just more. But once I took a step back, and then we talked about in the meeting with Mr. Campbell, I felt, you know what, this is the best way for us to be competitive and get this job done and support the housing element. It was given to us as well. I thought this was a nothing. I was just going to raise my hand when I came in here because it was already done. And I found out, you know what, there are two things that we need to address. And that was the Banning Ranch side that Mr. Klob brought up. And I thought that was really important. I'm glad they brought that up and we took care of it because I think it's important that we are doing exactly what's available to us. And then I think that this is also important to endorse what's been done on the number of units we need in each of these areas, but to give developers a competitive opportunity to come to our city with a solution to get to the housing needs we have. So from a land use committee member that spent that time on it, I would highly endorse what's been proposed today.
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to come back really quick to Ben because at some point in the sake of time, we need to make a recommendation on this. So just have a point of order real quick from Ben.
Thanks, Chair. So I just wanted to point you all to the recommended actions before you. I think that better frames this conversation as well. And I know that it looks like something got jumbled here to where this is reviewing the GPAC's recommendation, but obviously we want you all to review the land use policy matrix as you're discussing now, and either consider supporting the revisions as shown, or you can also support modified revisions. Ultimately, we're looking for GPAC's support to bring this forward to Planning Commission study session at September 21st, so late next month, just for further input and further community input. Obviously, Planning Commission is a 7-member appointed committee that deals with land use issues all the time. So looking for direction from the Planning Commission, and also would just note that your support tonight is not sealing the deal for these policies. It's really just allowing us to bring them to the Planning Commission for further discussion and further sharing with the community to get broader input. So if you're able to make a recommendation either for the land use element policy matrix as shown, or if you'd like to have a substitute motion that talks about different density limitations, that is totally appropriate. I just want to point your attention again to that recommended action where it does mention you can make modified revisions to the policy matrix. And then secondly, just making a recommendation about Banning Ranch as far as how you'd like to see it in the land use element update. I will just to emphasize too that this is purely implementing the housing element. So that comment is correct that the housing element policies have largely been set. The land use element is further implementation and kind of setting and moving the ball down the road. But we will be able to come back in the future and revisit the land use element holistically in other areas outside of the housing arena. So just wanted to kind of provide that framework in hopes that helps you make some form of recommendation this evening. We would really like to get more broad community input and share this with the larger community at your discretion. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Robert, I'd entertain a motion now to approve this, if you'd be okay with that. And then if anybody has any other comments, or if Graham, you want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
All right, we have a second?
Specifically approve the recommended action number 1. Can we do 2 different?
approvals for banning and for the GPAC land use matrix. So I make a motion to recommend that we proceed to place the land use matrix to the planning commission.
Okay.
Is that what we're
Second.
We have a second from Robert. Any discussion?
Yes?
Yes,
Discussion?
Charles.
So, one of the things that hasn't been discussed, and I'm a great supporter of affordable housing. I have children, just like many of us do, that would love to live here. But this proposal does not guarantee any affordable housing, none. It is only market rate housing. And when I said earlier that residents are not in support of more market rate housing, that's not my opinion, that's the residents' opinion. So in September of '24, the land use element is likely to go to a vote of the public. The more ugly we make this, the less chance that has of passing. And we want it to pass. Even my group would like it to pass. The uglier we make it, the less chance it's going to have to pass. If it doesn't pass, we have a risk that the city will throw their hands up to the state. The state will come in and override 423, and we'll lose what the residents have spent a great deal of time developing. So my argument is leave it the way it is so that we have a better chance of having this pass in September. None of this guarantees any affordable, and as Jim mentioned, developers have for years been coming to us and asking for exceptions to the rules, and they are regularly granted. That can happen here. Just opening the door now does not necessarily give us any more affordable, which is what we all know we need.
Thank you. Debbie, please.
Okay, yeah, and that's the one point that really has to be made. But whatever our recommendation is here, it's going to go to planning, positive or negative, correct?
Yeah, that would be the plan.
Okay.
We have a
So-
broader conversation, and then things could change.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm just going to say reiterate what Susan said, and that is, in my opinion, the housing element looked at a lot of this information, the densities and all that kind of good stuff, and it was tough. I mean, the committee members in many cases weren't happy, the community members weren't happy, the developers weren't happy, which means it was a compromise. And I think that's a really good sign, and why I think we should leave it as it is and let them come forward. I'm not against 100 dwelling units in some parts of the city, but I don't think it should be everything, and that's where I really have the problem. Thank you.
Any further? Dennis, please.
I just need a clarification. So the banning ranch issue has been mentioned a couple of times. Is that part of this, or are we bifurcating this?
Bifurcating. We're doing this first one, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Nancy, please.
I'd like to reiterate what Debbie said and Charles said. I'm not suggesting that I'm against housing. I think in a couple of areas this is completely appropriate. I think that we need to try to figure out creative ways to get more affordable housing. I have 4 kids, none of them can live here. It's too expensive. They're never going to buy a house. They might be able to rent, rent. One of them does rent here, but it's difficult. So I think that affordable is really the key component here. And we did have an approved housing element with affordable housing in it at densities that were approved by HCD. The other thing that I'm feeling a little bit concerned about is that we still do not have a consultant. We have not had any public outreach for this. So we're marching down this road approving these things, and we haven't had any professional advice from the consultant who's doing these in other cities, and we haven't gone out to the public to see what their temperature is. That's going to matter a lot in 2024 when we put this on a ballot. So I'm concerned about that.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. Jim, did you have something? Then I'll come to Tony.
First, regarding the banning ranch motion, at the subcommittee meeting, there was a question of what removing banning ranch meant.
Jim, on that, can we come back since that one's not on the table yet? We're just doing the first one, yeah.
Then on the land use matrix, I expressed the concern at the subcommittee meeting, and we really didn't have time to discuss it, of what had happened to the concept. The issue here is not just density, but it's these capacity caps, housing units per focus area. And treating each focus area separately kind of loses sight of the city as a whole. And should it happen that sufficient workforce housing is developed in some combination of these focus areas that we may or may not anticipate, I thought that there was an understanding that the eligibility for using these entitlements for market rate housing or forever, the door would be shut on that until we had another requirement for workforce housing to come forward. And I don't see any closing the door on this once the workforce housing is built policy. And that's a real problem for me to support that without seeing that in it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Tony, please.
Yeah, speaking to Robert's point, there was a significant debate in the Land Use Committee where densities were actually discussed between 75 and 100 units per acre. And, really during that period, I think it demonstrated some compromise, even in our committee. Speaking to Charles' point, yes, it does need to go to the voters. And the more we understand the impact and the development opportunities by passing something like this, the better we're off to communicate to people in our neighborhood. Because I had an instance with somebody in CDM worried that all of a sudden, someone was going to accumulate an acre in CDM. I don't know who's going to accumulate an acre in CDM at $40 million when they can only pay $8 million to make this project work. So it really does come down to numbers. Robert illustrated it really well. A project doesn't work if you're 50 units per acre. I mean, stuff will go vacant. Then the issue comes down 5 or 7 years down the road when nothing's been built, and then we're under the microscope with the state. And I know cities across Southern California that the state is literally taking over planning departments. They have no say. I just don't want to get it to a point where our city is the same way.
Thanks, Tony. Okay. If no further discussion. Yes, Debbie, please.
So I just would love to see those numbers. I love that you guys have them and that you know them off the top of your head, but the rest of us don't. It would be nice to see those.
Thanks, Debbie. Okay, if no further discussion, all in favor of the motion that Graham made, sorry. What do we have there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 in favor, did I get that right? Okay, all opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the motion does not pass. So I don't know, where does that leave us in terms of, okay. Does anyone want to make an alternate motion?
I'll make the motion to remove Banning Ranch from the general plan.
But as of the first one, that's an easy one. We'll get that one done in seconds. But
I'm good
is there
with
an
the other
alternate
one.
motion for maybe not altering the dwelling unit numbers or something?
Well,
or no?
You don't need an alternate motion once you voted. You don't need a substitute motion once you voted.
Because you're saying it would stay the same if it wasn't edited, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The table's clean right now.
Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, at this point in time, we don't have a motion on the table. I guess the thought would be, absent the increases in density that were proposed, can we get a motion to make a recommendation to forward this on through the process, just without the density increases?
And removing Banning Ranch.
Well, maybe.
What does it look like?
Let's do that separately, I guess, but, and I think we know the outcome of that.
Graham, go ahead, please.
What does it look like to actually just solicit feedback from the Planning Commission as to their opinion on it, as opposed to our opinion on it? Maybe, unless, yeah.
Well, I think we will get that, and obviously the narrative can be explained to the Planning Commission through a staff report, and we intend to do that. But I think what I'd like to get from the committee tonight is a recommendation to endorse the policy matrix as it stands without the increases in density. And then the Planning Commission can take this information under advisement, and their recommendation might be different. It might be consistent with it. And then we'll forward that both recommendations will go forward to the City Council for their ultimate consideration.
Who can do anything anyway. They can change any of it.
At the end of the day, the council will, we serve at the pleasure of the council. They're the policymakers, and so they can make some changes to it as long as it's within the scope of the environmental analysis, and as long as it implements the housing element. they've got wide latitude and discretion. So I guess I would like to have the committee to consider possibility of making a motion to approve it without the density increases. And unless there's a variant of that, like say Newport Center and the airport area, higher density would be fine, and not increases in density for the rest of the areas. That's just a variant that I spitballed there, but if I were going to make a recommendation, I might look at the airport area and Newport Center differently. Then I might look at all of the other focus areas. And I think that may be just a reflection of the sensitivity and the buildings and the existing land use patterns that are there. And the feedback that we're getting on density came from property owners who own property in Newport Center and in the airport area. And this is their concern, that the density of 50 dwelling units per acre plus density bonus just didn't make it work for them. Is that universal throughout the entire community to where we need that 75 dwelling units per acre in Dover or Westcliff? I don't think that that's necessarily borne out. Obviously, it would provide more flexibility for those projects. With all that being said, I think I'd like to suggest and maybe solicit if we can get a motion either to do approve the matrix, setting Banyan Ranch aside for the moment, with 0 increases in density, or possibly just those 2 focus areas I mentioned.
Debbie, please.
Just a quick question for clarification, Jim. So has that land use matrix never been approved by this committee?
No.
No.
Okay.
Correct.
Because that's why I was like, we don't need to do anything, right? So that, yeah, just thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Dennis, please.
That's kind of what I was saying. There seems to be a real push to get something through, but none of the points that Debbie brought up earlier about having consultants, having more input information, and so on. I mean, we are pretty early in this game right now. I'm open to like why the urgency to get this out of here to somebody else, because I don't see the urgency.
So, yeah, please.
Jim, can you explain the timeline, please, and
Yes,
why it
thank
is
you.
urgent? Thanks.
Certainly. So, again, we backed into a schedule based upon going to the election in November of 2024. And there's a fair amount of room in that schedule. And the direction I was given is to try and get this to the city council as early as possible in the calendar year of 2024. And so in order to do this, and in order to avoid having the EIR that we are working on, the hopes was to get that EIR out in October. We don't want to really have that EIR out for public comment over the holidays. That's universally frowned upon. Point of the matter is that we have a schedule that kind of sets ourselves up to get this to the vote of the electorate in November of 2024. And, we do need to go through kind of a broader outreach effort, and that is really with the Planning Commission and the City Council and this body. And so we want to push this forward and have at least some visibility of the policies by the Planning Commission and the City Council before we put the EIR out. Right now, the schedule has the EIR coming out in middle of October. However, I think that's going to be pushed back a little bit. And so, do we have a couple of weeks? We might have a couple of weeks, but that's about it. And I think, the kind of the urgency of kind of working on, urgency may not be the right word, but to try and adhere to the schedule so we can get this to the council and get them to endorse something, and then obviously to put it on the ballot for pursuant to Charter 423, is pretty critical. And so that's really the sense of urgency that I see. Could we take 2 more weeks on this? Possibly we could, because the EIR is going to be probably delayed at least 2 more weeks. So, I would prefer to try to get a recommendation out of the group today if we possibly can. But it's really up to the committee. I don't want to force the committee to make a decision that they're not prepared to do.
Thanks,
This is
Jim.
where we ended up last time. This is the exact same process we went through and we spent an hour and a half on last month, guys. Like, when we end up like this, we gotta move forward. We gotta go learn. We gotta go out, talk to people on our own, talk to developers. We can't do this every single month and just go, hey, I need more information. I need more numbers.
Okay, so I'll make a motion that we approve the matrix to forward to Planning Commission minus the 4 density increases and including the Banning Ranch and the other changes that were made. There were very many other changes made over time.
I'll
Thank
second
you.
that.
Second that from Susan. Motion by Charles. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Oh, Jim, please.
Yeah, I would again appreciate if the motion could be bifurcated into the two pieces, because I have a different vote on the two pieces. If it is combined, I'll stop Banning Ranch now.
Okay. Would you entertain a friendly motion?
Sure.
Okay, bifurcating. Okay.
I'm unclear what his
So then we'll come
position
back
is,
to
so.
banning. No, thanks for that. Okay, so the motion on the table is just to approve the matrix, but without the increase in the dwelling unit numbers. Okay, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
So what do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Motion passes. Oh, I'll abstain from that one. Okay. All right. Can I get a second motion from you for the Banning Ranch one?
To approve the matrix removing the Banning Ranch.
Okay. We have a second? Okay. Jim, please.
Yes, at the subcommittee meeting with the limited number of members in attendance, I raised the issue of what it meant to remove Banning Ranch from the land use element, because there are numerous pages in the land use element currently devoted to Banning Ranch with a set of policies. Should it be developed? A set of policies should it not be developed, and a long narrative explaining the history of that and the intent. And at the subcommittee meeting, I believe the staff said that they envisioned two different ways of removing Banning Ranch. One was a simple one. One referred to as major surgery, removing all of that. So I am not clear on what we are endorsing here. Totally removing any reference to housing at Banning Ranch from the entire land use element, or just a single policy being deleted, which I'm not totally sure how that works. So I would like to know what we're voting on.
Thanks, Jim. Dennis, please.
Perhaps the maker of the motion could clarify.
I was unclear because I wasn't unable to make that meeting, so I didn't know that Jim raised that question and what the answer was. So this is new information to me. So I'm not sure what we're voting on because I thought it was clear, and Jim makes the suggestion that it's not clear.
I think Jim might have an answer.
Well, absent language directly here for me to show you, what I envision this would be is just to remove all references to the existing 1,325 housing units that are provided for in the housing element. We would actually make no other we might have to make a few policy changes where we would eliminate references to housing. I don't have a draft for what that would look like at this point in time, but I think it can be done fairly readily based on this direction. And obviously then endorsement by the city council. Again, this is something that the city council ultimately is going to have to weigh in on, and we can provide that draft to them.
Thanks, Jim. Graham, please.
Again, as a housing advocate here, I'm not for this motion simply because we're going to be set with this general plan for many, many years, and it's a bit short-sighted to remove it completely from the opportunity set in housing. I know there's an incredible history there. I don't need to go into that today. Totally understand that, but to remove it completely as an opportunity zone not only removes the opportunity to put housing there, but also puts more pressure on other areas, further putting pressure on the housing and affordability in the city. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Okay. Nancy, please.
The staff contacted the owners of Banning Ranch and asked them about that, and they are very much would like it removed. They are not going to do housing. There's a deed restriction against it in the property.
Has land use ever changed over time? I would advocate yes. You've seen family zone parcels of land in New York City, in this very city, in fact, for hundreds of years. Things change. Conservation easements eclipse, state laws change. It's very short-sighted to remove something that has an opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Please.
Yeah, but it's about the money that was used to buy Banning Ranch. It's restricted from allowing any housing. Can you elaborate on that, James, exactly?
Well, that's my understanding is
is that it was prohibited by the owners, and they were restricted from using their money to do that. So I think it's a done deal. I mean, if they want to do it later on, they can do an amendment. I mean, we're not planning for the whole future here. We're just trying to get this out right now because the owner said he doesn't want it in there.
Thanks, James. Any other comments? No.
It's not just that he doesn't want it in there. He can't have it in there because of the source of the dollars that purchased that property. It has to remain open space to the public and not developed. So then when we were discussing that, those, Jim, how many units did you said were allocated to Banning Ranch? Those could then get shifted, or they couldn't get shifted. They don't need to be shifted. Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, they don't need to be shifted. They can be removed from there. They have to be, because nothing can be built there. And they don't have to be shifted. Is that correct?
Well, a couple things about the units for Banning Ranch. The current general plan has some 1375 unit allocation. The housing element increased it by 100 units. And so the way I read the letter from the Conservancy is that they don't want to be a housing opportunity at all, which would eclipse the existing 1375 and the 100 units, right? So it would be 0. Now, what we did with those units is that since we couldn't convince HCD that this was a viable housing opportunity site, given the constraints and given the length of time it might take to get an entitlement, well, get it planned and get it entitled by the city and the Coastal Commission, you know, we basically left it as an opportunity site, but we did not use it as meeting our construction goals, if you will. So we can remove it without really any penalty. It doesn't really change our housing plan at all. So we don't really need to reallocate it anywhere else.
Thanks, Jim. Any other comments? Tony, please, sorry.
Just so I'm clear, I'm confused. The owner made the representation he wants no housing, or was it the Conservancy that bought it? Was it a condition of their purchase that it remain open space? So we're bending over for sentiment of Conservancy.
Right.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Unless they somehow sold that land or did something right, but the Conservancy's pretty much controlling that in perpetuity, right?
Well,
yeah. So, Robert, please.
If there's a political agenda, then the city council is going to overrule us here. So this is our recommendation. I thought it stuck with what our mentality was, that we didn't think it could get approved. We wanted to send a clean recommendation on our housing element. And that's all we're doing. If there's something above our pay grade, it's going to get thrown back in there right away. So I don't think we have to get too worried about it.
Good point. Okay.
We actually went out to the owner and asked him specifically, and he came back exactly. So we didn't make a decision just like Robert's on our own.
But the council could still do, as Robert says, whatever they want. So.
Okay. All right. Motion's on the table. We have a second. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Any opposed? We have 1, 2 opposed. Okay. Motion passes. All right. We're going to move on now to item 4C, brief overview of the city's budget. And then after that, we'll do subcommittee updates. And then we have a couple more items after that. But Ben, please.
Thanks, everybody, for your time. And firstly, I have to apologize. For better or for worse, this is going to be very brief, as I was just informed that this is broken when I got here. So I very much apologize. I'm going to just make this a little interactive and keep it short and fun. And I plan to provide a follow-up email with some more information on the city's budget. I also would draw your attention to an attachment to the agenda. That is the 2020 census profile for the city of Newport Beach, which I find pretty interesting. I don't want to go into the numbers there, but I wanted to give you the snapshot so you could look at it and digest it yourself. A few things that are not on there that I thought were also interesting is who can guess what some of the largest employers or industries are in Newport Beach?
Sure. Hoag and Glidewell Laboratories.
So healthcare is huge in Newport Beach. Very good. Anybody else? Any runners up to that? No cheating. What's that?
Hospitality.
Hospitality, sure. And then also finance is a big one I would point out in professional services. So as far as the budget is concerned, I know Charles knows this number because he's made reference. So Charles, what percentage of the city's general fund revenue is sourced by property tax?
Just about 50%, and 85% of that is personal residences.
All right, so Charles is very close. It's 45.4% from the city's finance director's presentation, so I'll take his word for it. No offense, Charles. And we have a couple of close runner-up in terms of other revenue sources. Any guesses? You're cheating because you're on the finance committee. Okay. Yeah, so very good. So Nancy is on the finance committee. TOT, transient occupancy tax, is a revenue collected from our hotel operators in the city. That is about 10.5%. And then above that is sales tax, which is from retail sales. Automotive is huge, as you can imagine. Luxury automobiles especially. That's 16% of the city's revenue sources. Just generally speaking, property tax revenue does increase year over year as time goes on, with projections of, looks like, $138 million for the fiscal year ending 2024. Sales tax revenue took a dip from COVID, obviously, but has rebounded and is back. We're at $49 million, although I'm not sure how we adjust for inflation. Transient occupancy tax revenue is projected at $32 million. So those are all very healthy kind of incoming revenue sources for the city's general fund as we look out to fiscal year 23-24. Let's see here. What else can I highlight? Again, I'm going to send an email to let you look at this, and I very much apologize. I know this is lackluster, but thanks for humoring me. The proposed and now adopted 2023-24 budget is just under $300 million, $293.9 million. There was a slight increase. I think generally it was outlined as due to cost associated with cost of living adjustments, some employee retention practices, as well as, I forgot the rest of it. So recapping some key messages from the finance director's presentation, there's about a $6 million unrestricted surplus in the 2023-24 budget, which is great. All the general fund revenue projections are strong for the city, so we have a very strong budget. I think the reason that Nancy Scarborough asked for this to come forward is that there may be some consideration to those revenue sources, and sorry if I'm mischaracterizing, the importance of those revenue sources for the city as we look to the general plan and to Graham's point, looking to the long term, these may be things we want to plan for in the future as far as how we support these revenue generating sources to help make sure that the city's budget is strong so we can provide strong services to the community and the residents. Let's see. Another thing that I think is very important to point out is that the city council takes an aggressive stance on paying down the pension liability. So it's projected that as long as the markets play nicely, the city will have paid down all the liability by 2032, which is huge, and a lot of cities can't say that. And I think that's going to free up a large chunk of the general fund to fund future projects in the capital improvement program, which will help ultimately make the city a better place than it already is. That concludes my brief presentation. I don't have the ability to answer too many questions because I'm not in the finance house, but happy to do what I can. And I'll definitely put you in touch with the finance department if you do have specific questions or would like to get in the weeds. Thank you.
So,
yes, Charles.
When that pension debt is paid off, the city will have an extra $45 million a year.
That's correct.
Currently spending on paying it down. Huge.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Charles. Thanks, Ben. Good report. Okay, Jim, please.
Yes. Regarding the demographics, we have information here on the makeup of age, population, and so forth. One thing I think would be of interest to us, and I may be here, but I seem to be missing it. Do we have any information on the turnover rate? What is the typical tenancy of people in different kinds of housing in our city? Is that available anywhere? Do we know what it is? And could that be provided to the committee? Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for the comment, Mr. Moser. It does look like there's some housing occupancy and housing tenure data in the demographics profile on the second page. However, if that doesn't answer your question, I'm happy to talk with you offline and follow up with the committee with more information on housing data specifically.
Thanks, Ben. And this is on page 33 in your guys' packet. Thanks, Ben. And then, so, oh, yes, Susan, sorry, please.
Thank you. Ben, we've seen a decline in population in Orange County over the last 10 years of about 7,000. So do we have demographic projections? Well, first of all, have we seen a decline here in Newport Beach? And then secondly, are we looking at, from an employment standpoint, one of the news reports coming in from Bloomberg today was showing a significant departure of financial institutions from California to different states, from California and New York, actually, to the Sun Belt and other states, taking with them over $1 trillion worth of assets and significant employment. I don't know what proportion of the employment is within the financial institutions, but it's the number 2 employer. So maybe we can just put into perspective what that means, what that looks like, whether we have also lost financial institutions.
Thanks for the comment, Susan. As far as the declining population statewide, I'm not absolutely sure about the city of Newport Beach, but I believe that there has been a slight decline in population. I want to say maybe even just 2,000 people, so it's not substantial or significant. Maybe it is statistically significant. I don't know. I can't do the math in my head right now. But I will say that I think it remains to be seen how large employment industries will be affected moving forward, not just the finance industry, but we're seeing a huge onset of technological digital transformation with artificial intelligence now becoming more popular, and how that will affect certain industries' viability and vitality, I don't know. But I think these are the point of sharing this information. I know 2020 is largely out of date by now, unfortunately. I think this just gets the committee hopefully thinking, how do we adapt our general plan for the future given these possible trends? And I think what you're touching on is more of a regional thing. SCAG, for instance, Center for Demographics Research at Cal State Fullerton does a lot of the year-over-year changes, and so that's something that we could definitely tap into and share with the committee moving forward.
Actually, the Orange County Business Council does a lot of the work too.
Real quick, I just looked it up here real fast. The year over year for 22 to 23, this is coming from the State Department of Finance and the Demographics Unit. We have a 0.3 reduction in population, and that's a population estimate. So they publish these things every year, and they do go back quite a number of years. So there may be a slight dip, and that may be due to current economic headwinds, if you will. That doesn't appear to be a significant dip year over year.
So
Charles.
It went down from the last census a couple of thousand, close to 2,000. That's why we had to go through redistricting last year. And where we saw a loss in population was in Corona del Mar and on the peninsula specifically, and that was generally attributed to an increase in short-term lodging, which displaced permanent residents. Not a reduction in housing. We've had an increase in housing, right?
Right.
Yeah, we haven't had decreases in housing stock, but I think just the occupancy, is changing. We've got one of the lowest occupancy rates in the county. It's hovering around 2.2 persons per household. In other communities, it's quite higher than that. I think that short-term rentals does play a role in that.
Okay. I want to point everybody's attention to, as part of this, moving on to Part D under current business, pages 39 through, I guess that would be 42. If anybody has any updates to the roster there, please let Ben know. That's on pages, again, 39 through 41. And then the other thing I wanted to call folks' attention to was the memorandum, which is on page, this would be 42. This was an outreach committee had met, so there's a brief memo there that encouraged folks to take a look at. And also on the last page of the packet is sort of give everybody a timeline as to where we're at and where we're going with some dates there. Okay, and then moving on to future meeting speakers. This is again part E under current business. There was some talk about maybe bringing in a futurist as a speaker. So I guess sort of defer to you guys in terms of if we've got somebody, if anybody has somebody in mind for somebody to come in and chat, or if we can come back to this. But
just to clarify, I believe there were some names potentially thrown around, and if there are no specific futurists that you had in mind, staff can do our best to seek a futurist. Susan, I saw you raise your hand. Sorry to steal.
that's okay. Oh, that's good. Any comments on that? Debbie was getting excited over here. Does she have somebody? Or
I don't know what a futurist is. It's like, what is a futurist? Sorry.
It's a chat bot. So, all right. Dennis, please.
Well, actually, a good example of a futurist is Jeremy Rifkin. So if you looked him up, it's quite a few years ago, but he actually spoke at our library here, and he was on a futurist. He was speaking on a much grander scale, like United States and world, and that. And it is actually what it sounds like. So if you want to get an idea about a story on a futurist, look up Jeremy Rifkin. But also, not at this moment, but I wanted to say something on D. So we're talking about E now, but I wanted to...
Sure, Dennis, please, go ahead.
Okay.
That's fine. Yeah.
So up to this point, the updates from the committees have been kind of like, does anybody have anything to say? That type of thing. As we move through the process a little more, I personally would like to see that maybe a little more formalized, where it is a responsibility for the committee to develop, each committee to develop a report. Now, I'm not talking lengthy. I mean, they could come back and say, we talked about erosion on the beach or something like that. I mean, I'm not talking about something extensive, but I think as we get further into this, it would be good that there be a little bit more formal reporting to the whole group from each of the committee rather than just, does anybody have anything to say?
Yeah, no, good point, Dennis. And I think maybe it's either they provide a memo or they just say no report, and we can have that in writing. Okay, I like that. Yeah, good. Yeah, please, Nancy, or...
One of the things that we've talked about in the subcommittee meetings is to have every subcommittee meeting available as far as discussions, not necessarily film of it, but the discussions and everything available and posted on the website so that anybody could say, oh, gee, they had a safety committee meeting. Let me see what they talked about this week. So in addition to that, but we do need that, and I'm hoping that the consultant is going to help us get that going.
All right. Thanks, Nancy. Ben, please.
Just to, yes, so that comment about creating a repository for subcommittee presentations and documents was heard. We're trying to figure out the best way to kind of structure that. And to Dennis's point, I think part of the memo that you see talks about more structure moving forward. So I think you'll see just that. Up to this point, as you know, our talented planning team has been trying to provide introductions and bring in subject matter experts from other city departments. The memo addresses this, but indicates that it'll become more organized moving forward, such that some subcommittees will not be meeting every month as they have been. It'll be more organized in the structure of the timeline of the general plan update, and that's kind of what was shared as the attachment. So moving forward, you'll see a more organized approach where I think it'll be easier to bring those sorts of deliverables, and it'll be more productive, more meaningful, and more structured, which I think is what you were commenting on. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Susan. Thanks, Susan. And then I'd like to throw somebody out there, Dr. Chris Mattman. He is the Chief Technology Officer at NASA and JPL. Just a great individual, and I think somebody in line with what folks are talking about in terms of futurist and artificial intelligence and all that. So I think he might be great, and he'd do it for free, I'm sure. But or at least I'll tell him he's going to do it for free. But all right, anything else? Okay, Graham, please.
One more since we're throwing people in.
Yes.
John Burns runs a real estate consultancy and is the foremost expert in housing research in the country. And he's based out of Irvine. So really, they have a huge company, does all this heavy research into housing and specifically around builders and developers. So maybe. Thanks.
That's great. I wonder if we might be able to do like an outreach event, like on a panel or something. Anyway, I don't know. We'll figure it out. All right. Okay, so that's it. That was point E under current business. Moving to section 5 as we get towards the end of the meeting. Any matters any folks would like to bring up for our next meeting? Anything on an agenda item? Nancy?
I have a question. What is the status of the consultants at this point? We've been talking about that, and it's always out there, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. Do we know?
Sorry, just to clarify, you're talking about Dudek and Cairns and West? Okay, so one thing that I think was mentioned in the memo for the last attachment is Dudek and Cairns and West were present at the outreach subcommittee meeting. They are kicked off. They're presently working. I think those who are in attendance at the outreach subcommittee meeting can attest that it felt very productive, and there was a presentation made. So we foresee once the structure is formulated around the comprehensive update, they will be more involved at subcommittee meetings and at future advisory committee meetings and steering committee meetings as well. There's just no real need for them to attend this evening, but they are under contract. They are currently working. They are working on the resiliency and sustainability study that they're doing, as well as the outreach component, which I think it's mentioned in the memo as well. The outreach subcommittee is meeting next week on Monday to review a draft of the outreach and engagement plan. So they are actively working and kind of figuring out that first component to kick off the rest of the timeline.
Thanks, Nancy. Any other comments? All right, well, with that, I move us to adjourn. I don't think we need a vote on that, do we? We're good. Have a good night. And I think the next meeting is not determined yet, but you'll get an email about it. Thank you, everybody.
We'll call the steering committee meeting to order. We're all here. Public comments on non-agenda items. Charles? No? Really? This is a chatty group usually. Okay. I have a motion to approve the minutes. In a second.
Second.
Are there any corrections or additions? All right, they'll be deemed approved. Philip was just asking why we even have this basically on the next item on the agenda, since you would already vote. One of the things that I do as chair is I report back to the council on what goes on at the GPAC meeting. And this gives me at least an opportunity, because we have to be so careful of how we communicate. This gives me an opportunity to say, well, in my report to the council, I am going to talk about the discussion that was had, the points on both sides, and that the vote was rather close, but this was the way they decided. So that way the council will get an understanding, not just of what was passed forward, but what the whole situation was and everything. So I just, that, and with the Banning Ranch again to talk about, since the council has said they want Banning Ranch in there, well, okay, but this is the reasoning behind it for GPAC moving forward. So that's one reason we can have it here, I guess. Any comments from the public on item B, the land use element? Are you tired of talking about it? Yes.
I'll talk about it.
Yeah.
I think that we could, well, it's clear to me that the committee has a belief that the group that wanted the increase in density has a belief that that would generate more affordable housing. And I don't think there's anybody on the committee that doesn't support affordable housing, but a better education on how that would provide more affordable to make the argument, because I don't think it was well made that it provides more affordable. It was well made that it provides more density, which could lead to more building, but not more affordable. And that could make it more palatable to those that might believe that just increasing the density gets more affordability.
I think that one of really invaluable for the GPAC members to have someone, an outside speaker, come in and talk about, I mean, because I've heard both sides, oh, well, you know, yes, you build more houses, and then I've heard it just the opposite, so I have no idea. So that might be one of somebody who can really comment on that would be great for all of us.
I would just quickly echo, like, as an expert that, not myself, but asking for an expert to potentially come in and talk about, or just an outside consultant to talk about, you know, density and what that does enable on a project basis. Robert made a comment on that I thought was actually pretty insightful, but that was a qualitative comment. You know, I don't know how heavily to weigh that in voting on something like that. And I would also, just in kind of reflecting my own decision-making process, note that, you know, I think people might be amenable to different density increases in certain sub-areas, area by area, but when you see it put across the whole, you know, all of those prospective areas in one proposal, I think it is a little bit harder to stomach than looking at a proposal that might look at one or two of those regions.
Ask a question. So I don't want to open up a can of worms, but I do want to try to understand something. The Banning Ranch component itself was reviewed and discussed over a long period of time in the city's history. I completely understand where it is today. It's deed restricted. It used funds that do not allow it to change. Why was there this driving need, though, to try to remove it from the housing element? That's the part I'm not following.
During the process for putting opportunity sites on the map, if you will, there were some property owners who specifically requested that their site be removed in the airport area. The ownership of Banning Ranch specifically asked for that, but when it was asked for, the folks that were asking didn't actually own it yet, and so the city balked because the group asking was not really the owner. At the time, the owner was the oil company. Now that the ownership has changed to the MRCA, I think is what they're called, they specifically wanted to be removed, and they wrote a letter to the city saying, remove us. So that's the reason.
And if I may, just also to clean it up, you know, somewhere our general plan needs to be like cleaned up, you know? So it was kind of, it's not going to be part of it. And it could change in the future. I mean, you never know. But at this point, it doesn't look like it.
Well, I think part of it, too, is that when we did the outreach initially about, here are your maps, here are your Legos, where do you want to put it? It was like, oh, we'll put it in Banning Ranch. And for people who are not involved in this in the way we are, that still looks attractive. So to say, no, you know, guys, Banning Ranch is out. That you may not want it here, but we have to put it someplace, and it cannot be on Banning Ranch because of the issues that were brought out in the meeting earlier.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think it's important that we have an idea of where we're getting the metrics that we're basing the density arguments on, because it's great to hear everybody talk about it in here, and you know they've done their own research, but I think maybe just some objective standards that everyone can look at that we can also use to rely on when we're defending this down the road publicly, right? So how did we come to this determination would be helpful instead of just kind of informal reports from people who have done their own research.
Susan?
I was just going to say that the city had a report by Kaiser Marston that provided the metrics. That was very well done, and there may be benefit in circulating that to the committee.
Can we do that, please? That seems like a good idea. Okay. rather than just, I don't know, would it be self-explanatory if it's sent out, Susan? Or does it need to have an intro?
It's 300 pages long.
Oh.
Is that the report that assesses
Yes, it may be.
affordable
but
housing?
There was a good PowerPoint presentation that went to the city council that was very well done.
So this is the Kaiser Marston feasibility analysis
Yes.
for affordable housing?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's affordable housing within within an inclusionary project. So you're seeing how the densities work to provide affordable units. right?
Perhaps we could circulate the
We definitely can do that.
PowerPoint with a reference if you want more information. Here's a 300-page report.
We can provide links to the report and to the presentation that Kathy Head gave the city council. That's readily available. We can send that out. I'm not sure it's going to kind of tell you objectively whether 75 dwelling units per acre versus 50 is appropriate in the West Newport Mesa area. It's really not going to give you that kind of level of detail, but it will give you kind of an insight into how these projects are financed and what some of those assumptions are and how a project is put together. So it's an interesting read. It's pretty dense, but it's a good read.
Didn't it look at different geographic areas, the different areas?
It did break down the city into several geographic areas. We had thought that the value of land in Newport Center versus, say, the airport area would make an appreciable difference in what ultimately might be feasible to include, if you will, as an affordability percentage. It did make a difference. Was it an appreciable difference? I don't know, but I think we'll definitely send that report around for everyone to take a look at, including the presentation or the PowerPoint.
There's a pretty good summary of it that's around, 40 or 50 pages, but it does take several areas and it goes into detail about why those areas can only support an 8% inclusionary or 15% inclusionary. So it's a really good document. It's a few years old now.
That sounds like something good for the committee to have access to, which takes us into point C. Did you capture the names that were mentioned? I would like to propose that as a steering committee, we recommend to the council that we do invite these outside speakers and that we also the city should be willing to pay some kind of compensation, nothing huge, but if there's a fee of a few $1,000s or something to cover somebody.
Yeah, I would suspect if we want some futurist to come and speak to GPAC or the steering committee or have a joint meeting would be fine. Typically, high-powered public speakers like that will charge a fee. And I have no idea if that's feasible or how much that would be, but I think we need to identify what type of speakers you'd like to have. We could research to try to get some names, and we can start to figure out what those costs might be. Are they available? Are they on the East Coast, or where are they? Because if it's somebody who's not local, there would be significant expense.
Right. Well, I think everybody almost that was not spoken of, mentioned at the GPAC meeting was fairly local. I know Susan, your fellow is, and the man that Graham mentioned was local.
But these are macro views, right? So I think each subcommittee should tell us what topics, at a minimum, even if you don't know the speaker,
okay,
what topics are of interest that need to be dived into more deeply, delved, yeah, more deeply into. And then we can try to make sure that we're addressing, because all the subcommittees need more specific information, even though as a group we want to.
Right, and we have wonderful reports from staff, but we want to get beyond the city as well in terms of perspectives of people who will come in and provide a slightly different angle to things too. Dennis?
Yeah, what I just heard, I think, is, and I agree, is that there would be one level where it was someone to come in and they would address the whole GPAC committee, and then there might be other people who are very focused for like sea level rise and retreat, that type of thing. So it'd be two different groups or two different types of experts.
But I think it would be nice if we do have, particularly outside experts coming to the subcommittees, that we try to capture them on film or to record them in some way so that people will have access. Nancy?
Also, that might be something that would be good for public outreach. I mean, I can imagine residents being very curious about what it is we are thinking of, you know, why are we planning this? And, you know, it kind of underscores all of our groundwork here. I just think it should be larger group.
So we will start looking at the list that was provided tonight, and we will also make sure that each subcommittee starts to be thinking of people, of areas of interest.
No, absolutely. I think that would be helpful. Everyone's been rattling off some names here. I wish I could actually write them as fast as you say them, and I can't spell them, so I really don't know who you actually identified. So if anyone has a name, please give it to Ben, and Ben knows. Maybe Ben's got the spelling down, because I'm not good at that. But I think if you've got some whether it's a kind of a big, broad overview topic, the futurist, if you will, or very specific ones, sea level rise, or whatever it might be. Send any suggestions to Ben or to Nancy and to myself, and then we will start researching it. Yeah. Now, we will have Dudek, who will be bringing in their expertise as well. So this is sort of on top of all of that. So
I think that we're all just very impatient about that. I mean, it seems like we have been waiting, like they're waiting for Godot. When are we actually going to see them? And but you did. Yeah, so you're going to hear from that too. All right. So, but soon, right? They're getting much more involved.
Yeah, very soon. One of the first things we wanted them to do is to prepare that timeline that you saw on the GPAC's agenda, and that will be replaced with a more specific schedule. That will have, to begin with, it'll have, months when we'll do something, and then eventually it'll come down to actual specific dates as we go a little further down the line. But, we wanted to at least give everyone an idea as to what the whole overall timeline would be to knowingly replace that with a schedule. We haven't got to that point yet, but a lot of that really depends upon what that outreach plan looks like. So it's going to be a little bit of an iterative process, and they're coming up to speed right now. And so I do say soon, and yes, I don't really like to be that vague about this, but we will be engaging with them on a more significant basis here.
Well, it's always better good than fast. So if it takes a little while to make a better plan, that's good. And anything else on the speakers? All right, then, Kimberly, take it away.
All right, so I think we had a really productive first outreach committee meeting, and a bunch of members are here, so thank you guys for letting me participate. We went through a lot of what you have in the advisory committee agenda back there, which has the timeline and kind of talks about what we're going to be doing from a procedural standpoint. What was interesting to me was that we had a lot of discussion about how we're going to get to the various constituents instead of having them come to us. And there were a lot of really creative, I think, suggestions made that are very tech-based in some cases, and also going out to the community and speaking to different organizations and having them get involved. One really great suggestion was to work with the schools and see if we could get some traction there, have them use this as a project and provide some feedback, get the parents involved. So it was a really interesting kind of brainstorm. And then the other thing was really just saying, what do we consider to be a successful engagement? So yeah, how are we going to quantify whether or not this outreach was successful? And I think that was, kind of still up for, debate, but mostly it was trying to get the, not focusing on the percent of reach as much as the actual engagement of the people that we're reaching out to. So that's something that hopefully Dudek and Kearns and West will take to heart, and we'll get a plan back from them. They're working on it right now, is my understanding. And I think that's kind of my
Put
takeaway
you on the
from
spot. Pleased overall? I mean, you think with your first interaction with them as far as receptive and?
Yeah, I think it's great that the outreach committee has a lot of very educated people from diverse backgrounds that can bring different ideas to the table. I think that will push Dudek and Kearns and West, because I think that they're still coming in with their traditional model, right? But it's up to the committee to really drive them, and I think that it was super productive on whatever day that was, 2 weeks ago, that we had the meeting. So I felt really good about it. I'd be curious to hear from some of you guys who participated what your thoughts were.
Any members of the outreach? Kurt?
I can add just a quick comment. I tend to agree. I think they did a really good job of they really started by listening and trying to understand what the people on the committee and in the community think might work. And they took a lot of notes, and it'll be interesting to see what the plan looks like and how much of the feedback they end up taking. But I can tell you, Dennis being one that speaks up, and many of us, I think, being very compelled to speak up, that if it's not in line with the feedback, I think we'll definitely push them on it in a helpful way. But I thought it was a really productive meeting, actually.
And I was just going to follow up on that. I think we're having a meeting next week, isn't it? So the plan's supposed to be available sometime in the next week or so. Is that right?
Okay, good. Just on that point, if I may jump in, so I actually just got a draft of the plan for me to look at to make sure that it looks in alignment with what was discussed. We have a meeting set up tentatively for next Monday, a week from today, with the GPAC Outreach Subcommittee and the Steering Committee Liaison to go through that plan and to provide feedback. So it is a very iterative process. So that should be coming at the Outreach Subcommittee members as soon as it is ready to do so, hopefully by the middle of this week.
Dennis, did you have something?
Yeah, see, we're here to make sure Kimberly talked nice about us. But I think there was definitely a recognition in the committee that the outreach committee has to be really front-loaded. The other committees have, I think, a little bit longer, but we can't be talking about outreach at the end of the process. I mean, that doesn't make sense, So I think there was a really recognition of that, and hopefully we conveyed that message to the consultants. And to Kurt's point, it looked good from their standpoint. They were taking notes and they were reacting well. The real test is going to be, what do they come back with, which is what I think you were just referencing.
I hope the experience is better than one I recently had, where we sat with them, not this group, and they came back with one sentence change. It was like, so, but they sound like they're really listening, so good. Anything else? Bill, anything?
On that I've got separate.
Okay, separate topic, go ahead.
So probably for staff, what were the results of the alternate Acevedo and the city attorney reviewing that?
Thank you, Committeemember Brown. So the policy or rule change to include an attendance policy is actually on the council's agenda tomorrow evening. So that is for 3 consecutive unexcused absences. It will create an automatic vacancy on the GPAC. And as far as the alternate, I know. But the good thing is, because you made an alternate recommendation at your last meeting, because Mr. LeGrand unfortunately passed away, we had the vacancy, but you made an alternate recommendation for Mr. Acevedo to step in. He has accepted and indicated his interest. Our city attorney's office is okay with that, so we do not need to post a whole other vacancy and bring it back to a future meeting. So with that, I would say that if we do have to post another vacancy, let's always make sure that we recommend an alternate. Thank you.
Anything else?
One minor comment
Curtis?
on that. I know there's a current rule in place that prohibits 2 members from a single committee of joining GPAC. Given that we might have folks that are dropping out, and I don't know how long the wait list of applicants is, but at least me personally, I don't necessarily think there's danger in having more people who are involved on other committees taking action on this committee, depending on, assuming that we're careful with, how we screen those people, how we let them in. It might be worth reconsidering that. I don't know if that's something that the council would be amenable to, but I know we had to turn a few folks down because there was already one member of a committee on GPAC.
I think, my feeling on that is we have, what I like about sitting in the GPAC meetings is I see 10 people, maybe 12 people that I've never seen before, that have had no relationship with the city. They've not been on a commission or a committee, and they just bring a different perspective oftentimes, and I think that that's helpful. I would not like a committee that had all people like that. I mean, I'm glad that we have people from various city committees and everything, but myself, I think that's probably not a bad policy to just limit it so we have these others, but that's just my feeling. Dennis, did you have something? Okay. Any thoughts on that? As far as whether we want to make a recommendation to the council to change that policy?
I just want to clarify what
We have
specifically are we?
in the General Plan Advisory Committee rules, it says that there can be only one member. For example, if we have Water Quality Committee, so there can be one member, but we can't have two members from that committee.
Those committees, got it.
From any city committee. So we named it. We tried to get someone from various committees, but only one. And as I say, I feel maybe there's a real benefit to that because it makes sure that we have a sort of a mixture that we might not have if we just had the people that were already on committees singly. So that's just my own feeling.
I tend to agree with you. I mean, I think that we've got the committees, right? I mean, they're there for a reason. So this is an opportunity to bring some fresh insight in.
I would say change it if the well runs dry and we keep losing people, but for now, I think we still have a lot.
Yeah. We still have a list. All right.
I think since you folks recommend the people that rule can be bent, if the council were to allow it, if you were to say, look, we've got two people here from arts and arts is well represented by the person here, no, we've got two people here from Tidelands and they maybe they have opposing views on Tidelands. It brings opposition, it brings a different view. So I think with you three able to recommend that, I don't think that's necessary to have that rule.
Or it can be like general plan amendments. We just suggest to the council that they change the policy for this particular person. All right. Anything else? All right. See you later. No, not yet.